Look who's been aligning with Omega. Here's your look at the McFarlane toys. Spawn, Monolith. Monolith is a walking mountain of strength, power, and savagery of hell. His monster's visage hides its innate intelligence and cunning from the world. What his motives are and who he will fight are still unclear. Before we look at the devilish details of this behemoth from that bad place, I'd like to first thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this sample of Monolith that we could have a look at in this review. Grabbing the tape measure, let's first figure out how tall the figure stands, and I'll bring in a couple of figures then for comparisons. Monolith, quite impressively, stands 9 inches in height, or the figure's going to be about 22.5 centimeters tall. Seeing as he is in cahoots, after all, with Omega Spawn, in hindsight, it probably would have been a good idea if I brought in the Omega Spawn for size comparisons, but its whereabouts remain unknown. The whereabouts, though, of Mega Violator remain quite known because it's always a figure I have on display, so that's what he looks like along with the mega-sized Violator, still one of my favorite figures that McFarlane has churned out in recent memory. In this case, I would say Monolith goes to, what, about the top forehead area, if you could consider that a forehead, of Violator. Another figure we can also bring in for comparisons. One's a little more closer in size. Here's also what he looks like with Cygor. Cygor, in this case, I normally would have had him hunched forward like a normal gorilla would have been, but I did want to put him at least on his hind legs more so you guys can see that he's about give or take the same size, and more of a regular-sized figure. Here's also what he looks like with the Spawn's version of Plague. In this case, Plague goes only to about the elbow area of Monolith. First, let me just say I'm surprised that this figure didn't come included with a trading card. That seems to be territory always covered when it comes to McFarlane releases, especially something under the banner of Spawn, and yet Monolith comes with Squat in the name of trading cards. He at least comes included with a display stand, although again, I think the display stand is maybe somewhat smaller than what it really should be. I mean, granted, it fits underneath his feet like any other display stand normally would, but I feel like it probably should have been a little bit bigger than the one that we get right here. I mean, we've gotten larger size ones. In fact, we just recently had a look at the Batman statue, and it came with one, what, about 4 times the size. I think maybe a little excessive when an overkill, perhaps, when it comes to plastic, but I don't know. I just think this display stand, as nice as it is to, of course, get the Spawn logo printed down below, I think is maybe a tad bit too small for the feet size of Monolith. By the way, in case you are curious, he does have pegels in the undersides of both his feet. I guess stands are good if you want to get this guy in a dynamic pose, other than just having him standing. If you have him standing, he stands fine. He really doesn't even technically need a display stand. The figure then also comes included with no accessories. So what you saw just for a second ago was all the things that come included with Monolith, which is fine. I don't think he necessarily needed anything else, other than perhaps one thing. And we'll get into that one thing in a moment. First, though, let's pick up the figure, though. He has quite a lot of weight to him, and normally the thing that goes along with these larger mega-size figures is that there's usually a lot of hollow plastic. Hello? Come on in. Not the case actually here with Monolith. If, for example, I had Overt Kill, which would be another in hindsight I probably should have brought in for comparisons, Overt Kill recognizably had quite a hollow torso. If anybody had the chance to pick up Overt Kill, you know what I'm talking about. This one actually has less the hollow plastic, it seems, in his torso. His plastic in his arms does feel a little on the more lighter side, but overall, like, he does feel heavy, but he doesn't feel as heavy as maybe a plastic figure like this would be of this size. So he's not quite Overt Kill hollowness, but he's not also a dense plastic either, like, for example, the Violator we looked at before. Head sculpt wise, let's get down to the one thing I wish this figure could have possibly possessed. Before I guess we talk about that, look at the head sculpt that we get here from Monolith. What a nice, cool looking figure. Still keeps the same deco as what we normally would get with a Hellspawn character. Of course, you got the trademark mask there, represented stretched across the sides of his face. You got some nice glowing eyes, outlined nicely in some panel outlining. In the middle of that, you can see there's a row of skulls, starting in small and getting progressively larger as we go all the way up to the top until we get to Daddy's skull, who likes his porridge too hot. Of course, then, the one thing I do think that the figure should have really had, here's what I'm going to talk about right now, is the fact that I like the head sculpt, and I love the way they've sculpted the teeth. That's one of my favorite things about this head sculpt, but I do think that maybe I have to wonder how this would have looked if they had somehow found the way to put a hinge joint right here. Have the whole bottom of his jaw be something that could actually work, where you'd be able to open and close the mouth. I mean, yes, it would have broken up the sculpt. Yes, you would have also noticed a little peg there off to the corner of his mouth, but just wonder, how this guy would have looked with the means to actually open up his mouth and showcase some of those chompers on the inside of his jaw. I like the way they've also sculpted the face. They've given some nice wrinkles, added in there some washing of a dark black just to bring out some of those details. Yes, indeed. He's a nice looking figure. The coloring overall for his palette kind of reminds me of if a high school was trying to do a horror movie and they didn't have the budget to buy real or fake blood, obviously, and they decided to use ketchup. Have you ever seen a movie really low budget and it looks like they used ketchup for blood? This kind of looks like his whole body's been colored with fake blood ketchup. Kind of that orangey reddish color. I mean, yes, it still has the decos that you would expect with Spawn to have. So you've got the big sort of M motif there across his chest. Large and colored, sort of an off beige color. It looks really nice on the figure. And of course, one of the big notable things about Monolith is the fact he has these giant skulls there on his shoulders. Softer plastic here on the lower tusk portion, but the overall skull is a fairly hard plastic. I mean, you can kind of bend it just a little bit. It doesn't limit any of the articulation either, because they've actually attached it here rather than further up on the shoulders, where of course that would cause a little bit more problems when it comes to rotating the figure's forearms. Those skulls would be ones that even Brock Lesnar would be jealous of. Anybody remembers Brock Lesnar? He still has it. It's not like he's changed it. Brock Lesnar's tattoo. I like the way also that they've washed across this some darker black too. It really does bring out a lot of the details. So while oversized figures like this sometimes get omitted when it comes to the paint department, I think overall he's got some really good paint here. There are a few little areas, like perhaps the little spike ringlet that he's got here, the band across his forearm. Looks like it was sculpted. Doesn't look like it was painted though, but at least they took the time to paint the individual spikes that make up the majority of it. Obviously, turning the forearm is going to wreak havoc when it comes to on your fingers, but overall, again, just really nicely painted here. You got again the guard that he has across his forearm, big long spikes on the ends of his hands. Don't let this guy give you a knuckle massage, whatever you do. And then again, he's got some really nice detailing, some additional paint added with the belt, some capsules there off to the side, colored in almost more of a kind of a neon green, and you've got some nice silver paint added here to the chain. Like, again, I don't feel like this guy got necessarily skimped in paint, other than maybe the already mentioned part that he has across his form, which I think is about the only thing I would have probably painted. Other than that, he does look like he's finished everywhere. He's got some pockets, of course. Everybody in the 90s always has to have a belt that goes across your thigh that has pockets. I don't even know what he's actually storing in there. But of course, he's going to have this on here as well. Nice texturing that they've also sculpted into the plastic parts as well. And again, he's got the lower guard here in the same sort of represented green that we looked at earlier here with the capsules. He's got that also here in the front for his guard. He doesn't have it on this side, but he still gets paint added in there as well. And they even took the time to paint the sharp, protruding nails sticking out from the ends of his toes. For the articulation here on Monolith, going back once again to his head sculpt, the head does rotate all the way around. I would have loved at this part to actually insert the fact that the figure does have a jaw that you could be able to open and close, but not the case, unfortunately. The head does look down that far. The head does look up only about that far, and the head also does rock back and forth as well. For the arms themselves, they do rotate all the way around. This is the only part of the figure where I feel like there's a little bit of kind of hollowness. Not that the plastic is necessarily hollow, but just the way you're rotating it kind of feels like there's a little bit of hollowness somewhere. Maybe it is actually in the torso, but the torso doesn't feel... Hello, come on in. It doesn't actually feel like it's as hollow of a piece as, say, for example, Overkill that we looked at before. Now, the figure does have a swivel in his forearm. What they've done instead of actually putting in a bicep swivel is instead what they put a swivel here in the elbow. He does have a hinge joint right there, but the hinge joint only obviously goes so far when it comes to bending his elbow. Hands rotate also all the way around. The figure does have a hinge back and forth also. Upper torso is on a ball joint. And by saying upper torso, it's essentially the entire body is rotating on a ball joint. Moving the torso obviously is going to break up some of the sculpting below the belt, but other than that, I don't mind that at all. Still at least has articulation where it counts. Now, the lower half of his body, what we're dealing with is hard plastic here. What we're dealing with at the top, though, is more softer plastic. Usually is the case when it comes to these larger scale figures, or even smaller scale figures too. They tend to put a plastic piece over top to hide the joints. And in this case, some would say, some have used the term coined diaper, a figure diaper. I don't think it is the case when it comes to these newer figures. In fact, I continue to sell the praises of the fact that these newer McFarlane figures seem to have a pretty good job of keeping like a seamless look to their body. And while there is, yes, softer plastic happening down below here, it doesn't look like a figure diaper. The figure's legs do split out. They seem to be on nice, large, ratcheted joints. You can take the legs and move them forward. You can move them back. Figure has a mild swivel at the top of the thigh. Single hinge only on the lower leg. The lower leg does swivel. It doesn't look like it really should swivel by the way they've designed it, especially with the knee in the front of it, but there is a mild swivel forward and back, or I should say back and forth on the leg. There's also an ankle pivot this way, or ankle hinge back and forth. The figure does have an ankle pivot this way, and as already seen, the figure does also have toe articulation as well. Yeah, again, it's a good looking figure. Let's get the hinge joint back for his ankle. That's the only problem with this ankle on this side, at least, is getting it bent. There we go. Getting it bent the one way. It's sometimes hard to get it back in place. Yeah, the figure doesn't unfortunately come include with any accessories. The figure doesn't even come include with a trading card. And yes, the figure doesn't include the one thing I really wish the figure could have had come included with him, an articulated jaw joint. A jaw joint. But what I do think he has where it counts, he does have paint where it needs to be. The only other thing I would have said, other than maybe the part that wraps around the little spike belt that he has around his forearms, is that you'll also notice as well the one other area not mentioned in this review that did get overlooked in the paint department is obviously the fingernails that he has on the ends of his hands. The only two things I think got unfortunately overlooked when it came to the release of Monolith here, but all in all, head to toe, as big as he may be, he turned out to be a really nice looking figure. While I have to admit the bar got raised too high when it came to the mega release of Violator, that there's yet to be a mega-sized figure that's come anywhere near the quality and the sculpting that they put into that Violator figure. Still my favorite of the mega-sized figures that McFarlane has churned out. There are every once in a while figures that come close to that, but again, they're never going to reach that level of quality. Monolith, I think, is a good example of that. It's a good-sized figure that doesn't have maybe some of the awkward hollowness that when we looked at Overkill was a very hollow piece, not only in the arms, but also in the chest, the torso. And Monolith seems to have a little bit more of a harder plastic. It could be also one thing that they're doing differently moving forward with these mega-sized figures, that they're still putting as much plastic into them as you would get with the regular-sized Spawn figures. The paint is on this guy pretty good overall. There are a few, again, points that I did mentioning at the end of the review. Obviously, the one thing I didn't talk about was the fact that his fingernails are one thing, unfortunately, that didn't get painted, but I probably could go in there and touch that up myself with a little bit of black paint, or even a black marker. I'd probably add that as well. The figure doesn't come included with any accessories. No, the figure doesn't come included with a trading card, but he does come at least included with a display stand, which right now is over off to the far side of my desk. I don't even think I need it at all when it comes to displaying this guy, and when it comes to even moving this guy after this review onto my shelf with the rest of the mega-sized figures. I still don't think I'm going to need that display stand. I like the fact that they included it, but I think in a character like this, either make the display stand bigger than what they are, don't just give them the regular sized display stands, or maybe if anything, don't give them display stands. I guess I shouldn't say that, because there's always going to be somebody that's going to want to use a display stand for dynamic poses on this guy, and not that you really would have as much the luxury of being able to put this guy in a dynamic pose as you would maybe say with a smaller scale Spawn figure that has, of course, a lot more posability going for him, but I guess it's not a bad thing that he comes included with the display stand. I'm just not going to use it when it comes to displaying this guy on the shelf. What do you guys think of Monolith? Let me know down below in the comments section. Could you see yourself being a collector that's going to pick up Monolith and add him along with your mega-sized Spawn figures? Also, as well, I'd like to thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this sample of the brand new mega-sized Monolith that we could have a look at in this review. Speaking of reviews, if you guys enjoyed the one you just finished watching, why not hit with a like? If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing and certainly on board to see more, then make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. And as well, that you're turning on the bell notification to get reminders all the time from YouTube. A ding-a-ling-a-ling ringing at your door. Hi, come on in. No, help yourself. Oh, you want to use the phone? Okay, go ahead. Yes, ring-a-ling-a-ling. Make sure you turn on that bell notification so you're always going to get those reminders from YouTube of whenever new content pops up from the person behind the camera. It's definitely going to be a lot more Spawn reviews coming your way. So as always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.